Good day, everyone, and thank you for joining us from around the world. My name is Justin Backley, and I am the Executive Director of the Shared Value Initiative. I'm pleased to welcome all of you to the Innovating for Shared Value webcast on behalf of the Shared Value Initiative and FSG. The Shared Value Initiative was launched by FSG as a Clinton Global Initiative Commitment to Action in September 2012. Now supported by 25 leading shared value organizations like Nestle, Intel, Mercy Corps, and the Inter-American Development Bank, the Shared Value Initiative works through forums like this one to advance the knowledge and practice of shared value around the world. We're excited about our program today, but before we get started, there are a couple of housekeeping items. We have reserved time for a Q&A at the end of the program, but you may submit questions to the speakers at any time during the presentation by typing a question into the Ask a Question box in the lower left portion of your player. Similarly, if you have any technical questions or concerns in audio or just following along with the webinar, you may also submit technical questions via the same Ask a Question box, and someone from TalkPoint will assist you. Finally, during today's presentations, your slides will be automatically synchronized with the audio, so you do not need to flip your slides to follow along. And as it noted on the lead slide, for those of you active on Twitter, please feel free to follow us on the handle @SVInitiative and use the hashtag #SharedValue during this event. And now it's my pleasure to introduce our first speakers and my colleagues, Mark Fitzer, a Managing Director that leads our Geneva office, and Valerie Boxstead, a Managing Director at FSG in our Washington office. They are the authors of Innovating for Shared Value, which was published in the Harvard Business Review this past fall. And they're here today, along with our guests from Barclays and Chimaera, to discuss how to enable social innovation at your company. Mark?
Well, thanks, Justin, and good morning or good evening, everyone, and Happy New Year. I'm so glad that we can have this event at the beginning of the year when we're all planning what's next rather than rushing to get it all done. So I hope this will be useful to you as you plan 2014. I want to open this webinar by talking about toilets, actually. We were just really inspired by a new report by our friends at Monitor Inclusive Markets India on the subject. Did you know that over 1 billion people don't have access to toilets, causing almost 3 million deaths a year? Do you know that the market for bridging this gap around the world could bring as much as $20 billion in revenues? This is such a shared value opportunity, and yet few are seizing it. Why is that? And why is it that so many have been inspired by the concept of shared value, especially since Michael Porter and Mark Kramer's 2011 article in Harvard Business Review, but that we get so many requests on how do you actually do this? Well, the reality is that implementing shared value takes a different kind of innovation and set of skills. As we learned by looking at over 24 case studies, and as Val and I and colleagues wrote about in this recent article on Innovating for Shared Value. Next slide, please. What we first saw was a clear mindset shift on how these companies think about social problems, not thinking of them as potential costs, but cost savings opportunities, as vast new markets or bad conditions to overcome to grow the business. And we'll hear from Chimaera and Barclays today about finding new business around some of these major global challenges. Access to clean water for Chimaera, access to health, meeting our food needs through better agriculture, and more for Barclays. Next slide, please. And what we focused on were examples of shared value on a large scale. A Dow reinventing oil to take trans fats out of our diets on a mass scale. Nestle delivering micronutrients to millions. BD, Becton Dickinson, developing technologies to protect health workers and patients and growing that to a $1 billion business, and many more such examples. And there was a pattern to how these companies have created such enormous new value. Next slide, please. What we learned is that to innovate in business is really not the same as to social innovate. Businesses like Lego know how to make great products that kids will love, but at the same time, they learn that using Lego to work with kids to improve their education or development takes an entirely new set of muscles. It takes overcoming inertia that pulls many of us to do just more of what we know how to do already, and often very successfully. It takes overcoming a perception that you cannot change legacy business models to tackle social problems profitably. It even takes overcoming stakeholder resistance to the very idea that a company should make money off serving the needy or the poor, as some of our friends in the pharmaceutical industry have experienced quite a bit. Next slide, please. So we learned that driving social innovation for shared value takes a totally new set of management practices. Next. And the first is about building purpose, seeing the opportunity in social needs and making it the mission of the company to bring solutions to widely recognized social problems. And purpose basically does three things, and they're all really, really powerful. First, it defines the target market of needs that the company will focus on. And that creates totally new boundaries for competition. When tech companies, for example, are no longer competing on technology, but its application to driving health or educational results. Or food companies or car companies thinking of their markets as nutrition or as mobility markets. Second, it channels resources towards social innovation and makes the identification of shared value opportunities day-to-day work, what you do when you get into the office. And that gives a license to social innovate to everybody in the firm. And third, purpose motivates people. And passion, we know, is a really powerful driver for action, for imagination. Leaders in our champion companies never stop building purpose. They go back to the original values of the company. They spotlight great innovations in the company that fulfill that mission that they're after. They quantify actually the markets or the risks that social problems represent and make them real that way to their colleagues. And they talk about it all the time. They make purpose authentic and real to stakeholders outside the company as well, because they're serious about the impact that the company aspires to. Next. And the second set of practice is to go deep on defined needs. And you saw the Lego example briefly in a previous slide. When you create a play product around Star Wars, and you know what you need is a license from George Lucas and great designers. But when you want to turn on the power of the product to develop a child and his or her math skills or language skills, then you know you need to go deep into schools. You have to understand curriculum. You have to understand how teachers are trained, or even how communities think about play, or whether they accept play or not as a good way to learn. Going after defined needs is about deep research. It's about understanding how to drive positive change, how to create a pathway to change, and it requires a totally new set of skills and partnerships. And I know both of our panelists will share how they've gone deep on defined needs. Next. How to drive specific outcomes around defined needs leads to measurement, the third set of practices. And measuring shared value is about basically systematically linking delivering new social outcomes with realizing new business results. And this is really tough for companies. It's a really tough new field. It's also really powerful. Because measuring shared value does two things. And we wrote about this, by the way, in a separate report with Michael Porter. During planning, it unlocks investments by predicting the value of the envisioned social impact, the value to the business. And this is pretty important stuff to get your CFOs fired on your shared value strategies. And during execution, it unlocks further opportunities for shared value creation by telling you where you're getting the social outcomes you expected and where you're getting the business value or not, actually. And that's how you get more learning and more innovation. Next. The fourth practice is about how to incubate social innovation, about choosing the right organizational structures to drive the social innovation process. And it's linked to the degree of clarity on the solutions needed to go after defined needs. And it's linked to measurement and the maturity of the business case. And some companies take a hurdle rate approach. Ideas have to meet a certain social and business threshold, and then they'll get funded and integrated into usual innovation channels. And that's how Chimaera does it. But some protect social innovation when the business case is longer term or more uncertain by creating social business units or social innovation facilities. And we'll hear from Barclays on that approach next. And the final practice we highlighted in the article is about co-creation. Now, that's become a familiar notion that business can't deliver on shared values without other sectors, without partners. But it's the degree of intent and professionalism that is new. Creating networks of people and organizations across sectors around the purpose defined by the company, around the specific needs targeted within that purpose, and creating networks along each stage of the innovation process. Networks for spotting opportunities, partnerships for product development, or post-launch dedicated partnerships for measurement, and so on. And what's so exciting about these practices is how they work with each other for driving social innovation. Purpose defines the focus for going after defined needs, but purpose also creates trust for co-creation. Measurement guides you in the innovation structures you need, and defined needs reinforces purpose, and so on and so forth. So since the article has come out, Val and I have been really heartened by the feedback that our paper gives folks a stronger sense of direction. But even for more direct guidance, and I'd love to turn to our colleagues who are doing this and slogging away at this in their company. And I'll hand it over to my colleague Val to introduce our first guest speakers. Thanks.
Thank you, Mark. And next slide, please. Thank you. First, it is our great pleasure to welcome Riikka Timonen, who is the Director of Corporate Responsibility at Chimaera, based in Finland. Riikka has worked across Chimaera's functions for 10 years in product development, in application management, in sales, and in strategy projects. So she's been leading Chimaera's shared value work with a broad perspective of the business. Riikka, please do tell us about Chimaera's great transformation around purpose.
Okay, thank you, Valerie, for the introduction, and hi to everyone. So my name is Riikka Timonen, and it's really a pleasure to meet you today and discuss shared value innovation. Next slide, please. So for those of you who don't know, Chimaera is about 2.2 billion euro global chemicals company. We are serving customers in water-intensive industries. But resource efficiency was not always the centerpiece of Chimaera's strategy. In 2007, actually, Chimaera was still a diversified chemicals company. We consisted of 4 more or less independent business areas, including paints, industrial chemicals, and pulp and paper chemicals. But year 2008 saw then a major change in Chimaera's strategy. There were major internal drivers for the 2008 strategy renewal, such as we got new ownership, the Finnish state sold major share to private equity and pension funds, and along came new management, but also there was the fact of unsatisfactory financial performance. However, at the same time, there were several global trends identified that created clear growth opportunities for Chimaera. For instance, we identified global water scarcity that was creating pressure for efficient use of water. We identified recycling imperatives and regulations affecting our customers, especially in water and fiber, increasing urbanization, wealth in emerging markets, expectations of sanitation and cleanliness, and of course corporate environmental and sustainability efforts. Kemira had existing, well-performing business in water treatment. Water was also recognized as a key element in pulp and paper business, which was another major business area for Kemira. So the new Kemira strategy started soon to form around water quality and quantity management. We saw great opportunity to utilize our existing strong competencies in solid liquid separation and industrial efficiency in serving our customers in water-intensive industry. Interestingly enough, this also meant redefining competition. Instead of competing as a chemicals company with other chemical companies, we nowadays compete within the arena of water technology. The new strategy was then based on businesses that contributed to 62% of the total revenue of Kemira. These core businesses were then reorganized into 3 customer segments focusing on implementing the water strategy. The rest of the businesses were considered as non-core, and we started to divest these businesses, not clearly focusing on water. The implementation path has been rather long. The last remaining item, the Chem Solutions divestment, was announced on the last days of last year, so 2013. Today, Kemira diligently continues to implement our strategy of serving the water-intensive industries with our chemistries. Kemira's business logic is based on the fact that our customers want to improve their environmental sustainability. Kemira has defined our purpose. We enable our customers to improve their water, energy, and raw material efficiency. Next slide, please. Kemira gets very often questions about the social outcomes of our business strategy. Especially our investor community would like to get numerical and more importantly data in the format of financial disclosure of the indirect impact Kemira is making through improving our customers' environmental sustainability. What is the true value generated to Kemira's customers? And what is the value generated to the customer's customers, to other stakeholders, and to the environment? We have tried to respond to these needs by developing other non-financial indicators for measuring the social value. For instance, Kemira estimates that during 2012, our products and solutions helped to treat over 11 million cubic meters of water, which corresponds to a direct daily water consumption of over 75 million people in the developed world, that is. In the emerging markets, that would mean even higher number of people. Moreover, Kemira stakeholders are also keen to understand what is the link between the social value that is created through Kemira's products and solutions and Kemira's business value. To put it more simply, the key question for Kemira is there a business case in water? We all have read about the megatrends that are currently shaping our business environment. Water scarcity, climate change, urbanization are all trends that should be contributing towards increased need for treating water and thus create business opportunities for Kemira. However, megatrends alone do not create revenue. To give you an example, only when the operating manager of the paper mill decides to invest in water treatment will it create a business opportunity for Kemira, regardless of what kind of megatrends there might be prevailing. Kemira has approached the topic by trying to identify the drivers that make our customers to invest in environmental sustainability. First driver that we have identified is regulation, i.e. I have to do. In this driver, the improvement in environmental responsibility is forced by regulation. Value generated can be measured in several different dimensions. For example, in the form of avoided fines and sanctions or downtime to Kemira's customer, or in the form of better state of the environment and the receiving waters. And sometimes the monetary value of this is difficult to quantify. Another driver we have identified is direct economic benefit, i.e. I want to do. Here the improvement in the environmental sustainability creates direct economic benefit. for example, savings in the water bill, in the energy bill, savings in the wastewater treatment costs. And then the third driver we have identified is other indirect benefits, for example, reputational benefit, i.e. I need to do. Here the customer wants to improve the environmental sustainability because it creates other benefits such as reputational, brand awareness, or public acceptance. And this is especially a powerful driver in businesses that are serving the consumers directly. Here also the value generated can be measured in several different dimensions. For instance, in increased sales through consumer preference, or again in better state of the environment and the receiving waters. And here again the problem arises how to quantify this environmental benefit. One can of course always argue whether Kemira's strategic change has been a success or not. One way to look at it is through revenue development. In 2007, Kemira revenue was 2.8 billion euro. In 2012, after divesting of 38% of the non-core businesses, Kemira's revenue is back to 2.2 billion euro. This gives a rather good indication of the growth ability of the continuing businesses focusing on water. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rika. And I really want to hover on two things that you said that were so profound. One was how you talked about Kemira redefining competition and the space you compete in from chemicals, which is sort of what you offer, to water quality, which is the social problem that you're trying to solve. And the second thing was how you talked about that, between recognizing a mega trend like water and actually the bottom line and implementing stands something very important, which is a very hard-nosed business case that has very rigorous and disciplined measurement associated with it. So thank you for that. And please do keep sending in your questions to Rika while I hand it over to our next panelist, who has also been at the heart of putting purpose back, and in this case, putting purpose back into banking. So it is my great pleasure to introduce Mark Thain. He is a vice president at Barclays, where he leads its social innovation facility, which he'll tell us more about in a minute. Mark has been at Barclays since 2007 with a background in accounting and project finance, and he's the one who developed the concept of this facility, which was launched in 2012 with a £25 million commitment. Mark, it's all yours.
Thanks, Valerie, and it's great to speak to everyone today. So I'm just going to start by briefly setting out some context, and I'll come on to talk about our social innovation facility at Barclays. So when Barclays' new chief executive, Anthony Jenkins, took over in 2012, he quickly launched his vision to make Barclays the go-to bank for all our stakeholders by changing what we do as a business and how we do it. This new strategic direction included the launch of a new purpose for Barclays and a set of values that everyone in Barclays now incorporates into life in the business. This type of cultural change, which encourages a move away from short-termism and narrow measures of success, is a long-term vision for Barclays. And the social innovation facility is not a quick, immediate response to that, but I wanted to set out this internal context for you because it gives a great internal platform for us to start to drive shared value. So what is the Barclays Social Innovation Facility? Now, very simply, it's an internal incubator and accelerator of shared value propositions within the Barclays business. So as Valerie mentioned, we're funded by £25 million of investment that we're using to invest internally in social innovation to help deliver the next generation of financial products and services that will drive social change and deliver for our bottom line in a sustainable way. Now, back in 2011, when we first conceived of the Social Innovation Facility, I was actually working in the community investment team at Barclays. So that's the team that oversees our philanthropic contributions in the form of around $100 million a year in charitable donations. We were asking ourselves at the time in that team how we can evolve those community investment programs to deliver more impact in both society and for our business. And we realised that our opportunity for the most impact in society is always going to be through our core business. Barclays is a huge global operation, 50 countries with 140,000 staff. We have a 320-year history and involved in the full spectrum of financial services. So if we can find a way of tapping into those core business assets relationships and expertise to develop those commercial solutions, our potential for impact will be huge, way beyond anything we could achieve with even a sizable annual grant pool of $100 million to community investment. So if we move on to the next slide, we asked ourselves, if these opportunities are so great, why aren't they already happening at scale in Barclays? So why do we need a social innovation facility? As we started to look into this further, you'll see on this slide some of the barriers that were stopping social innovation from occurring in the business. Now, I think it's fair to recognise that these barriers aren't exclusive to Barclays, and in most cases the barriers to social innovation aren't too dissimilar from the traditional barriers to change in any organisation, certainly large organisations. However, I think that in the case of social innovation, many of these barriers are often amplified. Now, we don't have time to go into all of these in detail, so I'll just pick out a couple and then happy to follow up in the Q&A if we want to discuss further. The way that all businesses assess investment opportunities, manage performance and report results has traditionally been very short-term focused, and it's this obsession with quarterly results, monthly, weekly and even daily dashboards that often then drives behaviours within a firm. Now, in the case of social innovation, the investment required is often looking to reach into whole new markets, leverage new technology, create new partnerships, develop new business models and distribution channels, and often manage through quite considerable complexity. So in these cases, the payback period might be longer, the return on investment certainly not as attractive in the near term. And we need to remember that our businesses aren't reviewing shared value opportunities and social innovation opportunities in isolation, but alongside a whole host of other investment opportunities and competing priorities, all that are competing for that same limited pool of funding to invest in new product. The other point I want to make before I move on is that businesses are great at scaling, but not so great at piloting or testing and learning. Once you have a proven, tested model, the businesses often have the resources to scale solutions virtually overnight. But innovation requires an environment where it's safe to test and learn, to rapidly iterate and be able to learn from failure. Now, the way that most businesses are structured, and certainly within risk-averse, regulated industries like financial services, it's actually very difficult to create the space to try new things and to be allowed to fail on a small scale and to test different models. I don't think anyone within an organisation is rewarded for failure, and that's going to stifle innovation at its very source. Businesses and the people working within them also see themselves as experts in their field. I mentioned that Barclays has been around for 320 years. I think in that relative time frame, the way we bank hasn't really changed a great deal, albeit things are starting to move more recently, led by technology advancements. This in-house expertise, the low risk appetite and inability to easily try new models means that we often end up with a status quo. Now, just recently, I actually had the privilege to speak to Nick Hughes at an event last year, who worked at Vodafone back in the early part of the last decade. He was part of the team behind M-Pesa, which probably most of you know. It's, I think, probably more than anything, revolutionised the approach to banking, certainly in emerging markets. He said that if we were thinking like a bank at the time we were conceiving M-Pesa, we would never have developed it. It's because we didn't know anything about banking and we were thinking with the freedom of a mobile communications company and actually just focused in very much on the customer needs directly, not the technology or banking elements. We then had the space within the company and the funding from DFID to carry out a soft pilot in a safe environment. So if we move the slide forward, what we're trying to do in Barclays with the Social Innovation Facility is simply overcome these barriers and help deliver a joint win for business and society. So let's move on to the next slide. So what do we put in place at Barclays to try and help us do this? The Social Innovation Facility, as we mentioned, was launched in 2012 with a pool of funding of £25 million. However, we see ourselves as much more than just a financial resource. Indeed, our name, which is often, to my frustration, misquoted internally as Social Innovation Fund, is deliberately named as a facility and not a fund, because we look to help build out the supporting innovation structures that you heard Mark and the team reference in the article, and provide much more than just financial support. Our facility invests in internal propositions brought forward by teams within Barclays that meet 4 basic assessment criteria. First, how will they deliver an ongoing, sustainable and measurable social impact? Secondly, how they drive business value. Thirdly, how scalable the proposition is. And finally, how well aligned each proposition is to our business strategy in the region. After all, we expect that any proposition supported by the Social Innovation Facility will eventually stand on its own 2 feet within the business and become fully self-funding. We have a governing council made up of senior leaders representing the full spectrum of Barclays business who not only oversee investment decisions, but also act as advocates for shared value in the businesses and help overcome any local barriers or blockers to change wherever they may occur. We also have a real focus on co-creation, working with new, often quite unconventional partners in new ways to deliver these sustainable commercial solutions. For example, one of the cases I've got on the slide here, in the middle on the bottom, is an example in Uganda, where we're partnering with CARE and the Grameen Foundation App Lab to deliver insight-led product innovation through a mobile financial services incubator. In developing appropriate financial products for the lowest income communities in society, one of the biggest problems at the very start is that lack of mutual trust and understanding between each other, both from the banks in terms of the needs and the lives of the customers, and the individuals lacking the trust and knowledge in how banks operate. By working with organisations such as Grameen and CARE, who are embedded within these communities, we can together develop very deep customer insights. On this partnership in particular, Grameen were able to spend over 50 days in the field working through their human-centred design process and involving our target customers directly in the product development process, something that we would find very difficult in Barclays to do alone. The opportunity to build new, deeper relationship with Barclays clients is also a really interesting aspect of our social innovation facility. Many large global clients of Barclays are making bold commitments of their own, for example around sustainability of supply chains, such as the incorporation of more smallholder farmers into their value chains. This requires investment, capacity building and support for SME development in many of the countries where Barclays already has a presence, and we are really well placed to support our clients in working towards these goals. We actually have a number of interesting partnerships at quite advanced stages within our portfolio. Finally, and most exciting for me in Barclays, is that I think we provide a platform for colleagues right across our business to surface their own ideas and help to drive change. We're looking at how we can create this culture of social innovation in Barclays, encourage new, fresh thinking, and nurture those entrepreneurs, so those individuals who are highly driven, very passionate and high-performing people within our organisation, driving change from the bottom up, inside out. And for the first time, we're starting to explore how we can encourage far more early-stage, potentially game-changing innovations that might lead to a pipeline of breakthrough products and services down the line, and creating the space to do that. So I look forward to continuing our conversation in the Q&A, but for now I'm going to hand back to Mark.
Fantastic. Thank you, Mark. Great contribution, and I'm sure generated lots of questions. Let's jump right into it, and perhaps let's follow the the order of the practices we described, because we had actually several questions coming in around the topic of the shift of the company towards shared value. How was shared value introduced to your executives or by executives to get a shift towards that purpose? How did we sell that purpose? How did we convince the company that water was a good thing to go after, or that Barclays needs to go to a new level of impact in society? And a related question was around the leadership capabilities needed to this. I know that's a slightly different level, but I'd love to have both of you, Rika and Mark, talk about that. How do we make that shift towards purpose happen, and what's the leadership component of that? What's your experience?
Okay, thanks.
Rika?
This is Rika, if I may start to answer. First of all, when Kemira started to look into water, so we didn't really know about the concept of shared value. It was more simply looking at the growth opportunities and how looking at our existing business segments and the growth opportunities there, and really looking at from the mega trend level and seeing the trend in different trends supporting the increased need for clean water in the future. So that was simply a business case for that matter. But yet, I must say that nowadays I think we have advanced a bit. So in earlier stages, it was also enough for our stakeholders to talk on the megatrend level. But more and more our stakeholders, especially of course the investor community, is questioning the link between, yes, we all know water scarcity, urbanization and so on, but how does that create business for Kemira, and how can I expect that my investment will prosper in the future with Kemira?
Great, thanks. And can you say something specific about the leadership aspect of this? Particular individuals, particular leadership culture to drive that change forward? Was it something that
I think that I think that we were in a lucky position that it was really the top management. Like I said, we got new management, also new chair of the board of directors, a new managing director that really saw the business case in water treatment. But then if you think about implementing this strategy in the organization, so that required a different kind of an approach. But there again, it was rather a typical strategy implementation approach, so just splitting the new strategy into concrete actions and basically following them up in like a balanced scorecard approach.
Well, thank you. Mark, would you like to?
Yeah, I think, Mark, it's a similar case in Barclays. I mean, we were very lucky at the timing of Anthony Jenkins coming on board as our new CEO, happened to coincide with the launch of our social innovation facility. In fact, we launched this just before Anthony came on board as CEO, and he then launched the whole new purpose and values of Barclays, which did set out whole new ways of measuring performance in the organisation, very much focused on the kind of longer term approach to viewing our business. And then if we look at it the other way round, so when I'm then out in the business selling this into our leadership and our executive, which I spend most of my time doing, I think I look at always adapting my messaging depending on who I'm speaking to. If I'm looking to focus on the business priority, then actually shared value represents huge business opportunities for Barclays. You need to think about Africa, for example, as a retail banking market. 80% of people within Africa don't have access to even basic financial services. Now, Barclays is an organisation that's been around for 320 years, so the growth isn't going to come by adapting our existing products and services. We need to think about whole new ways of doing business and developing new distribution channels, new mobile technology, and a new way of banking these particular sectors. So this is a massive business opportunity for Barclays. If I'm thinking about the social side, then again, if we can be the bank that finds a way of commercially and profitably developing products and services that allow us to start to reach into those sectors that are currently unbanked, then far more social impact than we could ever have through a charitable donation or a traditional philanthropic contribution.
That's great. And we've got a question around that, I think, around this huge opportunity. And I think one of the questions is, well, that seems like a sizable investment, but for the scale of Barclays, the investment in social innovation feels relatively small. And yet, I know you've got a big vision for it. You also, on the one hand, have pretty tough hurdles. You said, we have 4 hurdles: social impact, business value, scalability, aligned to strategy. Are you getting a pipeline that's promising enough that you think you can transform a lot of the business? If not yet, how are we going to get there? And how do you envision sort of growing this and going to a scale that begins to really influence and change the entire ways, bank's way of working?
Yeah, I think the £25 million investment, whilst it's sizable, I think you're right to say it's not huge for a company the size of Barclays. But let's not forget, this itself is a pilot for us. And I think I was saying about businesses not being able to test and learn new approaches. This whole approach to social innovation is a pilot in itself. So when I went to my community investment board and said, you guys should think about ring-fencing some of your allocated budget and give it to me to run a social innovation facility, if I went in and said I want £500 million or £1 billion, then I probably would have been laughed out of the room because this is untested. It's a whole new approach. So this is an opportunity for us to just try this approach, see how successful we can be, and if we can actually drive change and drive shared value through this approach, then I'm pretty confident that we will see that investment increasing, because it makes sense. Why would we invest in traditional forms of CSR alone when we could be driving shared value, which is far more sustainable? That's not to say we're going to stop all the traditional philanthropic stuff. There's always a role for that to play, and we have some hugely valuable partnerships. But this is a new approach for us that we're testing. In terms of our portfolio, we've got some really interesting things. So that I highlighted, I think, 6 things on the slide that's currently there, but we now have an investment portfolio of, I think, 13 or 14 individual projects. We have another 15 things in the pipeline that are coming down the line. And I'm pretty confident that as awareness of this grows within Barclays, that we're going to get some really, really exciting proposals coming down the track. And I think, part of the challenge for me up to this point, we launched this at the start of 2013, was getting the messaging right internally. People, not just within Barclays, people everywhere like to have in their heads this vision of you have philanthropy and community over on one side, then you have the commercial aspect things on the other side, and the two don't combine. So, just getting the messaging right, raising the awareness, and starting to tap into those networks of people across Barclays, we're now really starting to see some really exciting things coming through the pipeline.
Yeah, and that's great. And we were struck as we were researching some of the case studies we described in the article, and some going back 20 years, how billion-dollar businesses by Becton Dickinson started with one specific innovation on safety-engineered syringes, or Smarter Cities of IBM, multi-billion-dollar business, also started with an experimentation in one city, actually funded by the IBM Foundation initially. That M-Pesa that you mentioned started as an experimentation started by DFID in East Africa and grew to 18 or 20% of Safaricom's business over time. So this is, I think this is a great perspective that some of these huge shifts actually take time to nurture from small bases. But if you target huge opportunities, huge markets of needs, that's the linkage to scale ultimately. We had, I think we have a great question around measurement, perhaps for you, Rika. I think you talked about, you talked about the ask of stakeholders on the value of what you're doing for water. One of the question is, how does measurement, partially used externally as you described, but how is it used internally to make decisions, to prioritize where you're going to drive innovation, and potentially the results of measurement, how could it drive further value creation? Would you have specific examples or reactions to how it's used in managing your portfolio or what you do?
Sure. Thanks. I have a bit of a longer-term perspective here, but especially looking at the water treatment and wastewater treatment technologies and also the practices. I think that the Nordic countries were one of the first ones to really start looking into wastewater treatment and especially phosphorus removal due to the nature of our lakes that are rather shallow and easily contaminated. And Kemira also was there. We developed our first product for phosphorus removal already in the 1960s. And since then, the results really comparing the condition of the surface waters in Northern Europe versus then the Western Europe or the Eastern Europe or other regions respectively, they conclusively prove the positive impact that has been achieved over the 40 years by chemical removal of phosphorus. And this, of course, then has created interest in other regions and interest in chemical precipitation, and it really chemical precipitation of phosphorus is being then adopted in more and more regions globally, which is creating new business opportunities for Kemira. And this actually has then allowed the water treatment business to develop into the centerpiece of Kemira's strategy. And also this was demonstrated in 2010 actually when we invested over 120 million euro into a water-related R&D project, or actually it was a program called SWEET, Center of Water Efficiency and Excellence, where we also got external partners engaged. It became kind of a virtual research center with researchers from different organizations, Kemira and others, to together develop solutions for water efficiency and sustainable technologies.
Well, great. Well, let me bounce on that relating to another question, which you can follow up on or Mark can take over, which was a question that came in on this agenda on corporate social innovation and shared value, which is what is the intersection or the space between business trying to make money and from solving social problems in a powerful shared value way, and NGOs spending to solve social problems. And the nature of the partnerships that reconcile these two around these shared value opportunities.
Yeah, I can talk about that perhaps from a couple of our partnerships. So we have a role for NGOs to play in, I think most of our portfolio has some role at some point, but one in particular, so the partnership where I mentioned already around the work with Grameen Foundation and CARE in Uganda. This is building on a existing community investment partnership that Barclays has called Banking on Change with CARE and Plan, where we're looking to form village savings and loans associations, so these informal savings groups in, I think, 6 or 7 countries across Africa. Now, the work we're doing with Grameen is helping to really help to understand those, the needs of those members of those informal savings groups and look at ways that by linking them into the formal financial services infrastructure, we can really add value to them. And the roles that NGO plays in these instances is hugely valuable to us. Barclays could, we don't have people out in the rural field in these places where these groups are happening. We don't have the ability to spend days and weeks out there really starting to understand and learn how these groups work. So we really do trust and rely on our partners in the NGO world to help bridge that gap for us. And then also they play a role in helping to scale the solutions once we develop them. So in this particular example, working very closely with CARE in Uganda to help to sensitize the VSLA groups to the bank and educate them to the product propositions and make sure that both sides are comfortable with working with each other. So there's always a role for NGOs to play at some point, either in the early customer insight generation process or even as part of the commercial scaling of the solution.
Thank you. Rika, would you like to add on that question?
Well, actually only to agree on support what Mark is saying. So I also definitely think that there is a role for NGOs and partnerships in many cases in our project. So the actual work, especially when entering, for instance, new business geographies, when you don't really have, and for Kemira, which is not a huge company, so we don't have huge resources in place in every location. So in many cases, we work together with NGOs to do the ground level work and really also try to understand the local situation and the local context, and definitely there is role for both.
Okay, thank you. We've got a question that came in that was addressed to Mark, but I suspect, Rika, you also have really great insights on this, which is how do you, for Mark, it was how do you elevate the awareness of the fund, social innovation funding opportunity with your business teams, and what actions have you taken to build your portfolio? And I know, Rika, this extends to you as well in a different context because you take a much more sort of core business approach to sort of prioritizing portfolio ideas and generating new ideas in the business that are going to advance the strategy of the business around water. So what do you do to generate those ideas? But let's start with Mark and then Rika.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. So I'll correct you and say it's a social innovation facility, not a fund. Just kind of
sorry.
So, I mean, raising the awareness of it is so important for us. As I said, we have this huge business and some really, really passionate people within Barclays who are so close to these issues and have great ideas and just need a way to surface those. So one of the things that we see, one of the roles we see ourselves playing is, as well as financing individual projects, also joining up people from across the business, sharing best practice, creating networks and forming teams, virtual teams from across the different parts of the business, where people can come together, discuss ideas and start to work together on different propositions. So we've had some quite interesting ways of encouraging that, of both raising awareness and also encouraging that conversation. We had a couple of events in the recent past that we call SIF Hangouts, where we come together, we organise space within some of our large offices for people from right across the business who wouldn't normally get a chance to interact, to come together in person, to share ideas, to see some examples of what's in our existing portfolio, to play with some props around our current projects, and really to sign up to ongoing interactions with the Social Innovation Facility and be part of our network. So we have a range of kind of interactive events that help raise awareness and share progress and also sign people up, as well as obviously all the usual things like internal communications channels and online portals and all sorts of different ways to tap into those. I think what we find is if you can start to capture the imagination of your marketing team and your internal comms team, then the stories that we have in social innovation are the ones they want to be telling, because it's It's demonstrating, certainly given Anthony Jenkins, our CEO's new focus on shared value and Barclays' new purpose in society, what we have in the Social Innovation Facility demonstrates exactly the type of thing that we want to be showcasing both internally and externally, far more than anything in our traditional CSR portfolio. So we have the portfolio of case studies, and we then rely on our marketing teams, our internal comms teams to help get out there.
Thanks. Enrica, from a different perspective, I know you, at the onset of your strategy back 5 years ago, as you described, there was an effort to sort of really figure out the portfolio of priorities, right? What were you going to push forward, which products, and where, how would you accept new ideas and new products? How did that happen?
Yeah, sure. So we really we have been building our new product development process, so basically our innovation process, and it's based on a stage gate approach, really basic process. But we have incorporated the shared value criteria into that process actually. So we have built a certain criteria for each of the projects or ideas that enter that process. The criteria is also looking at the impacts on Kemira's own operations, like for instance safety or emissions from production, but also looking at the impacts in our customers' operations. And actually the outcome of the shared value or sustainability criteria analysis needs to produce a positive result in order for a project to pass a gate. And I'm proud to say that, for instance, in 2011, so each single new idea that was introduced to Gate 1 in our NPD process actually was incorporating the sustainability criteria into the Gate process. Also, we have introduced a couple of innovation contests. There is one going on as we speak, and of course we are introducing ideas into the NPD process automatically makes our people to think about the shared value aspect or the sustainability aspect. I also think that the new strategy focused on water has a factor of employee engagement, and that is especially has been evident in recruitment. We had to make quite many changes, especially in the R&D organization due to the new strategy, because we needed new competencies. And a lot of people that came in, that have come in, so they actually have said that they became interested in Kemira and wanted to specifically work for us because of the purpose of the company.
Yeah. Well, great. That just
Great.
addressed
Thank you
the last
so
question.
much.
Yep. Go ahead, Val.
Yeah. Thank you, Rika and Mark. And this conversation has been so intriguing to listen to because it really has re-highlighted the 5 ingredients that we set out to research for our paper. We talked a lot about purpose and how it takes senior leaders with vision and a long-term view and really passion and courage, as well as these brave implementers on the ground who are trying to, as Mark said, create those stories and those examples. We also talked about how just because there's a mega trend that has something to do with your business, that's not the end of the hard work. That's the beginning of the hard work. And really deeply understanding how that mega trend translates to your business and where you can drive new markets or reduce costs, that takes a lot of work and a lot of research, as we talked about so eloquently. We also talked about measurement and the importance of data and criteria and hurdle rates and return on investment. All of these concepts apply as much as they do in business as usual. We talked about partners and particular NGOs really complementing some skills that businesses just don't have, on their own. And Mark Sain's great point about the reason we're so excited about corporations embarking on social problems is because they can scale. But the reality is that testing and learning new ideas is not always an easy and comfortable place. So this idea of creating these safe spaces to test and learn and innovate are absolutely critical. And I know we didn't get to all of your questions today. but we will do our best to collate the questions and get them to our panelists and post answers on sharedvalue.org. Of course, the paper itself is available. The slides will be made available. A recording will be made available. So we'll make sure we get you all that information. And I did want to thank HP, who made all this research possible, for their tremendous contribution and thought partnership. And I will now hand it back to Justin, the Executive Director of the Shared Value Initiative, to conclude our webinar.
Thanks, Valerie. Thanks to Mark, Rika, Mark, and Val for this great presentation. As I mentioned in my opening comments, the Shared Value Initiative is building a global community of practice around this shared value concept. As a nonprofit, we exist as a public good to promote the shared value concept for the benefit of businesses, civil society, and the public sector in order to accelerate the positive role that the private sector can have in driving scalable social change. Now, the good news today is we have 3 immediate ways that anyone on this webcast can get involved directly in our work. And the first is that you can join our community, as many of you did when registering for this webinar, at sharedvalue.org. Thanks for that. And you can also follow us at Shared Value Initiative on Twitter. Secondly, we encourage you to request an invitation to our 2014 Shared Value Leadership Summit being held in New York on May 13th and 14th. We still manage this on an invitation-only basis to bring the leading thinkers across all sectors together to advance the how and why of shared value. If you're interested in attending, please send us an email to the email address listed here. And third, we've launched a new series of case studies, Shared Value in Action at sharedvalue.org, that you can find in our resources section, as well as other practitioner-focused research. So from these specific opportunities, I would add that joining our community will permit you to do several important things to advance the efforts in your organization. First, it enables you to connect with the over 2,000 members that we have on sharedvalue.org across sectors, exchange ideas with the leading thinkers in the space. It enables you to share, promote your own case studies, successes, challenges, and many of the questions I saw posed during the webinar today about the role of philanthropy in shared value, about the role of organizational change in shared value. You can share your experiences and promote your own successes and challenges. Third, you can accelerate your own efforts by tapping into our global network of shared value consulting affiliates, representing 40 firms from 23 countries who are advancing shared value thinking in every region of the world. These are firms like Social Ventures Australia, Impact Square in Korea, Pixera Global or CAF America in the United States, or Shared Value Solutions or JS Daw and Associates in Canada. Our affiliates also cover a host of professional services types, from strategy to marketing and branding to implementation, and they can help you in your efforts. You'll find them all listed on sharedvalue.org. And finally, you can learn. We obviously provide open access to practitioner-focused and vetted shared value research from around the world, both that FSG and other consulting firms have written, as well as companies, nonprofits, and civil society. Next slide. In closing, none of this would be possible without the support in our efforts by the 25 global organizations you see listed here. We thank them for their support that enables us to do our work, and most importantly, their leadership in the shared value space that helps advance our knowledge and practice of shared value. Thank you so much for joining us today. Goodbye.